This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by Hangman Fine Art Services. With the fall season officially underway, it's time to start thinking ahead. Art Basel Miami is just around the corner. If you're looking for a trusted logistics partner for the Miami fairs, look no further than Hangman Fine Art Services. Hangman offers a full-service facility right in Miami, dependable nationwide shuttle options, and a team of skilled experts ready to manage every detail with precision and care. Whether it's packing, shipping, or installation, their commitment to quality and customer service makes them the ultimate partner for your fine art logistics needs. And the good news doesn't stop there. Hangman has just expanded, opening a brand new facility in Brooklyn. This secure, climate-controlled space is perfect for fine art storage, with viewing rooms available later this year. For Miami or New York or wherever, Hangman Fine Art Services has you covered. Reach out today to get started by visiting hangmannyc.com. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. It was really nice catching up with so many of you last week at Frieze London. I think as expected, the fair brought the type of works you'd expect to see at a Frieze art fair. But what really stood out to me were the exhibitions around town. Several galleries opened really impressive shows featuring either emerging or established artists, making it an exciting time to be in London. I think Frieze Week remains the most important moment on the city's art calendar. However, much of the buzz that week was about what's coming next, Art Basel Paris. There's a palpable energy in Paris right now, driven in part by the return to the Grand Palais, as well as a wave of gallery expansions into the city. Everywhere I turned last week, people were asking, are you going to Paris? The anticipation for Art Basel Paris is high, and it'll be fascinating to see just how it plays out. In this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Naomi Rea, editor-in-chief at Artnet News. Naomi had excellent coverage of Frieze London, and she's here to help us break down the highlights and preview Art Basel Paris. Thanks so much for tuning in. Naomi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Adam. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate the time. I know you took a train today from London to Paris, and you'll be covering a lot of events throughout the week in Paris, and I'm excited to touch on Art Basel Paris later in the episode. But to begin with Frieze, there was a lot of anticipation leading up to Frieze London this year, particularly regarding how the market would perform. After speaking with several galleries throughout the week, what was the general consensus on the strength of sales this year?
It's a good question. I think it's always a funny one to answer because if you ask anybody who participated in a fair, they'll always tell you that they did really well. So it takes a little bit of sleuthing to kind of get to the truth of the matter. I think overall, the consensus was that sales did better than expected, but expectations were pretty low to begin with. So I think I would feel pretty confident in asserting that it was pretty tepid for sales. I think, we know we've been in a difficult market year. I don't know if it's worth retreading, the context, but obviously in inflation, rising interest rates. I think London specifically has additional challenges. Brexit has made things more complicated for EU buyers. And I think for Americans, there's not a great unfavorable exchange rate at the moment. And I think there was generally a sense that people were holding back a little bit for this week in Paris. As Art Basel Paris is having a sort of splashy debut at the Grand Palais, and that was kind of the sense that I felt. I think the younger galleries did perform better this year than I think in years past. There was a sort of slight shift to the layout at Frieze London. So I think the younger galleries kind of benefited from sort of foot traffic from that. And I think, material that was priced kind of less than $20,000, I think did move, but I think it was kind of slower among the big galleries. And I think that they sort of needed more to justify the kind of expenditure of participating in a big fair like Frieze.
You mentioned the layout changes at the fair this year. I found it really interesting. As I was walking through the fair, I suddenly realized many of the blue chip galleries, perhaps all of them, were positioned towards the back, which seemed like a deliberate decision by the fair. Typically, you'd expect these galleries to have some influence over such decisions. What kind of feedback did you hear about this new layout, and how did it impact the overall experience of the fair?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk about the layout. I think so much talk that my colleagues in New York who were kind of reading the Frieze content were saying, "Oh, enough with the layout discussion already. It doesn't really seem like that interesting of a point to sort of focus on." But I think that the fact that we were speaking about it so much maybe says something about the sort of amount of interesting things to talk about at the fair. Um, but I do think, yeah, it was intentional from Frieze. I think they wanted to sort of center the sort of younger galleries with more experimental positions, because I think this is kind of a sort of key part of Frieze London's identity. It was a fair that platforms these emerging positions, and so I think, yeah, that I was saying the younger galleries did benefit from having that foot traffic, because I think the previous layout where you would sort of if you were interested in the blue chip, you come into the fair, you can see all of those, and then the sort of second section of the fair, sort of the back of the tent. Some people may never even make it over there because that's kind of the emerging section. Maybe that's not what they're interested in, but this way, I think they benefited from the foot traffic. You have to go past them, on the way in and on the way out. So I think the younger galleries were happy with that positioning. As for the sort of more established galleries, who I think invest a lot in their booth presentations, and I think real estate is a really big deal for these galleries. Having the best position or the prime position at the entrance, which is where Gagosian always was in London. I think it's a big deal. So I think there was a fair amount of behind the scenes disgruntlement at the switch up, although nobody, of course, would say that on the record. I think all of the galleries, that I spoke to were very gracious about the shift and saying, "Oh, it's great to, center, the young and experimental positions, and we're very generous about that." But they all sort of mentioned, "Oh, but I hear my colleagues are not so happy about the arrangement." But of course, nobody would say that themselves.
Yeah, and I was speaking with someone from one of the blue chip galleries at the fair, and they mentioned that although the doors opened at 11 a.m. on the VIP day, it took close to an hour for large groups of people to finally reach their booth. And they were basically just sitting there in their booth waiting for the first hour. Because the layout this year, for those who weren't there, it was structured like a funnel system almost, with everyone passing through 4 sections in order. So everyone arrived in the first section, and then you made your way to the second, and the third, and finally the fourth. And it was the fourth section where the blue chip galleries were located. The layout this year didn't really allow for a choose-your-own adventure kind of experience like in previous years, where you could go to the left, go to the right, or go to the center. So I think that was really an interesting dynamic and quite different than in past years. I'm curious about the art on view at the fair. Did it feel like galleries were taking creative risks in terms of the work they brought, or did you feel like maybe they were playing it safe? How did this year's presentation compare to previous editions?
So last year, the fair had its 20th anniversary, and I think there was a fair amount of criticism that, the booths were too safe, and that, the sort of identity of Frieze, as I mentioned, as this kind of platform for experimental, exciting positions was kind of lost. And so I definitely think that there was an effort on the fair's part to recenter that identity this year. And, we talked about the layout shift. I think that was part of it. So definitely, there was an effort. And I think that there was a noticeable improvement on last year. But I'm not really sure about, that there were that many creative of risks being taken. I think among the bigger galleries, there was some, I mean, Gagosian actually had a beautiful statement booth of Carl Beauvais sculptures. And Listen also had a solo presentation of Leiko Ikimura that were really good. But I think mostly they were bringing sort of quite conservative material and sort of lots of it. Sadie Coles also had a really beautiful wall pieces and sculptures by Tao Lewis, although it was part of like a group presentation. So I mean, there was definitely a sense that there was kind of, people were hedging a little bit and not necessarily taking strong solo positions. I think this story was a little bit similar among the younger galleries. I think standouts, there was a lot of buzz around Edel Asante's booth because they'd built a sort of sauna to watch a video installation by the artist Jenkin van Zyl. But that was also part of a group show. And Gallery Vacancy also had a cool booth that was filled with this kind of like creepy forest sort of scene. And there was this big well with a long black braided piece of hair coming out of it. It was very grudge, and it was interesting. So it would be ungenerous of me to say that there wasn't anything interesting at the fair, but I think like overall the sense that I got, there was a lot of sort of trendy painting, a lot of kind of two-dimensional works, and I always tend to look forward to Frieze to kind of see weird stuff that freaks me out or excites me, and I don't know. It's kind of sad to say, like the last couple of years, I haven't really seen much of that.
So as we mentioned earlier, you're in Paris now for Art Basel Paris. A question I kept hearing almost constantly at Frieze London was, are you going to Paris? I think I was asked that at least 30 or 40 times over a couple of days. With Art Basel Paris just around the corner, opening later this week, how much do you think Paris was pulling attention away from Frieze? And how much could it be impacting collectors and galleries who are prioritizing it over London this year?
Yeah, a lot. I'd say it's taking up a lot of the conversation, and I wish it wasn't in some sense. Well, A, because I'm based in London, and obviously I would love London to have its moment to shine, and B, we've been having this conversation honestly for 8 years since Brexit. People have been talking about how Paris is going to take London's crown, and it's kind of I'm a little bit bored of the narrative, but you can't really ignore it because it is absolutely what everybody was talking about. I think that Art Basel this year is the first year that the fair is in the Grand Palais, which is this big, beautiful kind of glass cathedral. It's an awesome venue for an art fair. And I think they went big on sort of like getting people excited for this. There's lots of, exciting curation that's promised. And I think the quality is expected to be very high. So they've invested a lot in kind of getting people excited ahead of time. But I still do think that collectors are doing, like many collectors are doing both fairs. London and Paris are not so far away from each other. Even though, people tended to be more excited about Paris, like they were still in London, and seeing the fair, maybe they were spending slightly shorter period of time in London than they would have. And I know some people did skip Frieze, but it wasn't for Paris. It was just that the timing of Frieze coincided with a holiday on the Friday. So I think that generally there were I think American collectors. I definitely saw some American collectors there. So collectors doing both. I think galleries, on the other hand, there were a few galleries and noticeable kind of absences from Frieze this year. I think people were surprised that Pilar Corias, which is a London gallery, didn't participate in Frieze. And I think the London galleries, are usually very gung-ho about supporting the London scene and participating in Frieze. So I think it will be perceived as somewhat of a statement, even though, I spoke to Pilar and she was saying she had 3 solo exhibitions on in London. That was kind of quite a lot to be focused on at the same time as preparing for Paris. And she's very excited for Paris this week. I think she's going to have Sophie von Hellerman, which is one of her artists, is going to be painting people's dreams in the booth. And I think there's a fair amount of kind of organizational sort of stuff that takes up focus. But yeah, I did think that was that was noticeable. Marion Boski, who was another gallerist who last year she had this amazing presentation of Danielle McKinney paintings that sold out, and a lot of talk was generated around that. She also opted out because she's showing in Paris too. I think, wanted to concentrate her efforts there. And bigger galleries like David Kornatsky as well were kind of noticeably absent from London. So I think that, collectors might be doing both, but galleries do seem to be starting to pick.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, despite the current excitement around Paris, London will, of course, remain a major hub in the art world, with so many artists based there and a really vibrant gallery scene. So as we look ahead to Art Basel Paris, what are some of the key moments or events this week that you're most excited to watch and report on?
Well, I'm excited for a lot. I just arrived in Paris. So, this evening I'm going to go see the Elm Green and Dragsit show at the Musée d'Orsay. There's also a big Tom Wesselmann show at the Fondation Louis Vuitton. And I'm excited to see Martine Sims at Lafayette Anticipations. And there's a big Arte Povera show at the Pinot Collection. So I think one of the exciting things about being in Paris is really that you're just spoiled for choice in terms of the institutional shows to see. So I'm looking forward to that and really soaking in some art. Sotheby's has just opened its new headquarters, so I'll go and see that. I think the French auction market is really interesting, the developments in recent years, and I think it's it's just worth noting that Sotheby's is kind of doubling down in Paris at the same time as we are seeing some sort of weakening in London's market. So that's definitely interesting. And then at the fair, of course, we'll be watching sales. I think it will be interesting. People are very ready to sort of declare the end of the market downturn that we're in. And it'll be interesting to see, if people all of that talk about people sort of holding back their fire on purchases last week for Paris, it'll be interesting to see if that's actually true or if that's a kind of a spin of its own. Are people actually going to spend this week? Are we still kind of in this moment where people are being a little bit more conservative and sort of holding back with their purchases? So interesting to see if they'll be holding back for Paris or if they're just holding back full stop.
Absolutely. Well, it's an exciting week, and we can't wait to monitor and see how everything unfolds in Paris. Naomi, thanks so much again for coming on the podcast and helping us recap this year's edition of Frieze London. We really enjoyed your coverage on Artnet News, and if our listeners haven't read it already, we definitely recommend they do, as well as your forthcoming coverage of Art Basel Paris. And I know you're also on social media. Where can we follow you there?
Yeah, I am Naomi Rea, that's REA, on Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. Thanks so much again, Naomi.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by Hangman Fine Art Services. With the fall season officially underway, it's time to start thinking ahead. Art Basel Miami is just around the corner. If you're looking for a trusted logistics partner for the Miami fairs, look no further than Hangman Fine Art Services. Hangman offers a full-service facility right in Miami, dependable nationwide shuttle options, and a team of skilled experts ready to manage every detail with precision and care. Whether it's packing, shipping, or installation, their commitment to quality and customer service makes them the ultimate partner for your fine art logistics needs. And the good news doesn't stop there. Hangman has just expanded, opening a brand new facility in Brooklyn. This secure, climate-controlled space is perfect for fine art storage, with viewing rooms available later this year. For Miami or New York or wherever, Hangman Fine Art Services has you covered. Reach out today to get started by visiting hangmannyc.com.